Alright, this lesson, lesson 4, covers different types of ambulance. It's a pretty short one, fairly simple. We'll talk about all the different types and what it really takes to be an ambulance. Now we kind of got unlucky with this. So the very first standard that the national government, the federal government came up with was probably something about wheat or barley or something like that way back in the day. And they said it was standard A. And then they went B, C, D, E, all the way through. And when they got to Z, they went, okay, we'll start over and go AB, AC, AD, AE, and all the way through. And they got to the end, and the end, and the end, and the end. And eventually they got to K, K, K. And that's when they were trying to figure out what makes an ambulance. So we don't call it the KK standard, we call it the triple K standard. But if you meet triple K standards, you can put this Star of Life on your vehicle. Now this means that you have to have things like a light that's visible in 360 degrees with so many lumens and a siren that has so many tones and at so many decibels, and you have to have a certain type of drivetrain and tires and so much room and other safety things and all that stuff. But when you meet all these standards, you can be considered an ambulance and you can put the Star of Life on it. So we have a few different types of ambulances. Type 1 is a truck, and they put a box on the back. And these were kind of considered the gold standard for a while. They were, and still are, probably the most expensive, but you have the most room in them to work around your patient. Now that being said, it's pretty rare you have to get to all sides of your patients. Usually as long as you're on one side, you're okay. But sometimes it's nice to have these bigger ones, and they can hold a heck of a lot of equipment. You can put like 12 backboards and enough IV fluids to rehydrate a small city, and just 4x4 so you can put bandages on everybody in America. They're just big and have a lot of equipment and much more expensive. So this is what they look like, and you can see if you're driving, especially in a larger city, that would be hard to drive something that big. So we have the Type 2 ambulance, and this is a van. And these kind of fell out of favor, but they're coming back with the new Ford, Mercedes, Dodges, whatever these conversion vans are, and I really like the way they look. I think that's going to be the standard that we're going to. They're just a lot less expensive to purchase up front, plus they're a lot less to operate, and they take less fuel. Granted, you don't have as much room, but as I said earlier, you really don't need to get to all four sides of your patients all that often, so we can work in these just fine. And they look something like that. Those are some of the older ones. How to find a picture of the newer ones. And then we have a Type 3, and this was kind of a cross between the two. We took a van and put a box on the back of it. When these came out, they were nice compared to the Type 1s, because the Type 1s in the old days was literally a box on the back and a cab up front. And if you've ever ridden the back of a pickup truck, you kind of know what that's like. If you want to talk to the driver, you rap on the back window, they open up the little slide window, and then you can shout back and forth. Well, it used to be you had to open up a little window, reach your hand outside, rap on the back of their window, they opened up theirs, and then you talk back and forth through those two windows. Not so cool. And then 3s came out, there was actually a passageway that went from the back to the front, and now all trucks are that way too. All the Type 1s are that way, where you can actually pass between the front and the back. But these are a little less expensive, usually not quite as big, hold plenty of equipment, you can get to both sides of your patients pretty easily, but still a little bit more than the Type 2s to purchase and to operate. And this is what they look like. So they look a lot like the Type 1s. This is what I want someday, maybe. If I work like 40 shifts a week, I might be able to afford something like that. I think it's kind of a neat idea. There's plenty of room for a monitor and a drug box, and I'll just respond to calls if you need me. Just call me. Now, when we're looking at these ambulances, I want you to understand there's a lot of difference between these and your car. Some of you probably drive some pretty good-sized pickup trucks, and you may understand the front to back, the distance is probably about the same size as an ambulance, but your ambulance is going to be heavier because of all the equipment. They're usually a little bit wider. So when we're looking at this payload capacity, we need to know how much, all the 4x4s and the oxygen cylinders and you and your partner and all that weighs to make sure we don't exceed the limits of the ambulance. What we oftentimes don't know is just how heavy our patient is. And I suspect I've probably put some patients in my ambulances over the years that may have exceeded the payload capacity, because I've gotten some 600, 700, 800 pound patients occasionally. Not often, fortunately, but once in a while we'll get those big ones. I guess what we ought to do is we ought to load up the ambulance with all of our stuff and drive to the truck stop along the way, figure out how much all of it weighs with us in it, and then we can figure out how much of a patient load we can take. And sometimes it's the patient that's big, but then there's also family members that come with you. So you may have a couple of people riding with you. And if you knowingly exceed the maximum safe capacity of your ambulance, you can be held liable if you're involved in a wreck. Just realize these things are going to slow down a lot longer than your car will. We can't stop as quickly, nor can we accelerate, and we have to take corners slower. So, definitely bigger. You may not fit under things like you would like to. The extra weight, having to take longer to slow down, and not having the visibility behind you. Remember, there's no functional rear view mirror. There's one there, but it only really looks in the back of your ambulance. You can't look out the back of it. So you have to use your side mirrors. Definitely taller. One of the other lessons we'll talk about places you should and should not go with your ambulance so you don't scrape things off the top of it. We used to put the lights on the top of the ambulance, and we would routinely drive under things and scrape the top of the ambulance and knock the lights off. They finally got smarter and put the lights on the front of the ambulance so we don't scrape them off as much. But there's still some places that we can't fit under. So they are heavier, going to take a lot longer to slow down and stop, and it's going to take longer to accelerate too. And we will have lots of these blind spots behind us, so make sure you're using a ground guide when you back up. All right, any questions? Let me know.